Hello, listeners. Welcome to the 6th episode of the Unlocking the Energy Trilemma podcast with our hosts Ravi Krishnan and Jose A. Martinez, JAM. Today, Ravi and JAM speak with Emeric de Vigan, a forecast power demand expert. Emeric is VP Power at Kpler after the acquisition of Corey, a data and analytics company he founded. Previously, he was a power trader for prominent players in the industry for 15 years. Ravi, JAM, over to you.
So thank you, Ava. Welcome, Emeric, to the podcast of Unlocking the Energy Trilemma.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation.
As we always ask to our guest speakers, we ask them to bring us a fact or a figure related with the energy trilemma. What do you want to share with us and the listeners?
I think I'd like to say zero, because zero is the theoretical marginal price of a net zero energy production system. So this zero gives you an idea of the challenges ahead of us, considering the markets that we have at the moment.
Emeric, I guess a lot of your expertise has been around negative pricing, and you've been tracking the market for negative prices and how they create imbalances and how it also creates the need to maintain grid stability. In your opinion, what are some of the measures promoted by the European RTOs in this regard, especially to incentivize greater flexibility in the grid caused due to negative pricing?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. I'd say we're not there yet in terms of strong incentive to promote flexibility. But as you said, we're going step by step in Europe. We are indeed seeing more and more negative prices. Negative prices happen when there's too much energy and not enough flexibility. Some people say it's a sign of a well-functioning market. I would disagree. Sustained period of negative prices are not good. They're certainly not sustainable on the long run for generators because it creates a profitability issue. That said, there has been initiatives to try and make the renewable generation a bit more flexible. So there are these days for quite a few of the renewable assets, the wind farms, the solar panels, incentive to not run when prices are negative, because these assets won't get paid. So that's, I think, a first good step towards more flexibility on the supply side. I think the next big challenge is to tackle the flexibility on the demand side.
You said that the marginal cost of electricity will be zero, let's say. Then how will we pay for the electricity? It will be like the internet that we were used to pay kilobits per second, and then we pay a monthly fee now. So how will we pay?
That's the interesting part of all this discussion. I don't think there's one unique magical solution, but we definitely have to think at solutions moving away from the energy-only markets that we have at the moment. Because again, theoretically, if we get to net zero, these prices will be zero. So there are different options on the table. We could think at more capacity markets, where assets are paid for their availability, which is somehow similar to what the grid operators do when they reserve capacity, when they buy reserves. They make sure that there is capacity available to go up or down, if and when necessary. That's one option. As you said, it could be that there's no variable fee in the electricity we pay. It's just like a lump sum that we pay every month for the energy, the capacity, and the transport and the distribution. We could also think at maybe new innovative ways to create a market that accounts for availability, energy, and flexibility at the same time, as well as obviously carbon footprint. I think there's a lot of options. It's about time that we'll start having these conversations.
Industrial consumers, particularly those with flexible consumption patterns, are you seeing any trends where they can increase their energy usage during periods of negative pricing and help absorb some of the excess supply and stabilize the grid?
To be honest, I have not really seen that yet. I haven't seen really much reaction of the demand side to negative prices. What we have seen is reaction of the demand side to very high prices. There's clearly more and more flexibility there. I don't think we're there yet when it comes to excess energy. But let's not forget that we moved away very quickly from 2 years of extreme prices where we thought we would be missing power in Europe to this situation since, call it March, where we're facing oversupply.
Why does someone that sells electricity decide to sell its product at zero price? Why?
I'd say there's two things. If you are a renewable generator and you're under a feed-in tariff, you don't really care about the price. You're just going to get paid whatever the price is. So you would sell. This is why, as I mentioned earlier, there's more mechanism to incentivize these generators to not produce. But more generally speaking, people are happy to sell at negative prices or €0 prices when they're missing flexibility. So I'll give you a clear example. I think the easiest one to understand is with nuclear stations. You can't really run down a nuclear station for only a couple of hours. Technically, it's not possible. So you have two options. Either you shut the unit down for 24 hours, or you sell at negative prices for 2 hours and you make profit on the following hours. So this is essentially why generators are selling at negative prices, because they'd rather lose a little bit of money on a few hours to make money on the following hours where the units are needed to cover demand.
There's a number of ways that RTOs deal with persistent negative pricing, and that includes incentivizing the investment in storage, grid modernization, more responsive demand side management. Coming down to energy storage solutions such as batteries or some of the long duration energy storage, they generally become more attractive as they can store some of the excess energy when prices are negative and release it when prices are higher. Can you throw some light as to the evolution of energy storage technology as a potential offset or a mechanism to enhance grid flexibility in Europe, both short duration and long duration, in case you're tracking those?
The major trend is that batteries are getting cheaper and cheaper. But one thing to not mix up is the difference between actual storage and flexibility. At the moment, in Europe, as we speak, the biggest use case for batteries is providing flexibility to the grid. By flexibility, reserves. I don't want to go into all the details, but the TSOs have to make sure that they can switch something on if there's a big unit that goes offline, or they can lower the output of a station in case for any reason the demand is much lower than expected or the wind is much higher than expected. Batteries are really good for that, at least in some countries where there is this clear lack of flexibility, and I come back to that after. So that's the main use case for batteries, being able to ramp up or charge or discharge, if you want, in a few minutes. This is how they're used, how they make their money, much more than doing energy market arbitrage, charging at low prices and selling at high prices. Said differently, I don't think we're yet at a stage where batteries can store energy, can store surplus renewable energy. I think we would need much bigger batteries. At the moment, I'd say the only way to really store energy is high altitude reservoirs like dams.
I lived from the technological sector, the transformation of trading in the finance sector from, let's say, human traders to algorithm trading. And let's say if you had the servers, the connectivity, the hosting, the closer to the points of negotiation, the better. I think that we are likely to see large imbalance price spreads through the solar peak. And I think this is creating a kind of a speculative market. Is it correct? So I think the electricity is not based on cost anymore. How do you see this future?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say the way the market is designed should prevent market players from creating artificial high imbalances or taking ridiculous speculative position that would put the grid at risk. I'd say the risk for the grid is and will remain the fact that, to make it simple, there's a big cloud and suddenly there's less solar than expected. I don't think at that stage that what you mentioned, high frequency trading, poses a risk, a real threat to the market. The TSO, the grid operator, they know how to mitigate the risk. A, they have a view on the generation, renewable generation at the country level, and B, they know how to limit cross-border flows when they see a risk of too many interintuitive flows or loop flows.
Where do you see the negative pricing being more prevalent in Europe? Which geographies and which locations? And how does it differ between the different parts of the continent?
Yeah, so far this year was a good example, and it's been the case historically. Most of the negative prices happen in Western Europe, Germany, Benelux, and France. This is where the biggest risks are. For the reasons we discussed earlier, France has a pretty large nuclear fleet with low flexibility. Germany has very high renewable installed capacity with also flexibility issues with their coal stations. And Benelux, weighted to the size of their demand, have very high renewable generation too, with flexibility issues. So I think the biggest problems will be there. Let's not forget and draw conclusions too quickly about what happens this year, because it's also very much driven by the low demand that we're seeing since the energy crisis. That said, I don't know if demand will ever pick up. I hope so. It would be good for the energy transition, but we're in this very special situation since the energy crisis, where we developed a lot of renewable assets, whilst the demand came off quite a lot. And on top of that, the nuclear situation in France improved a lot. That's the proper recipe for negative prices. A lot more non-flexible supply with low demand.
And are some of these negative prices translate to lower electricity bills, in your opinion? If these price reductions passed by the utilities to the consumer?
Not yet, I'd say. Not yet. Maybe for some of the largest consumers, we have some exposures to the spot market. But it's actually a funny story. I don't know if funny is the right word, but just before the energy crisis started in 2021, 2022, the European Commission was pushing retailers to offer a spot contract, flexible, I think the word was dynamic pricing. Obviously, it was the worst timing ever, as you can imagine, because all the wholesale prices went up very much. I think we are now back in a situation where it would make sense to have a spot exposure, but let's give some time to the consumer to trust the market again. But long story short, it doesn't really impact direct the end user bill yet.
Yeah, you mentioned that demand is not very high, but I would expect from efficiency measures that the less energy we use, the better, because that wouldn't produce CO2, that wouldn't consume resources and so on. But it appears that if we do not increase the demand, then renewables are, let's say, they have a lack of use. And my question is volatility prices in Europe a consequence of massive investment in renewables? So the higher the renewable in the mix, the higher the number of hours with negative prices?
Again, I think it's a combination of a lot of things. We have negative prices because we have this situation where we have an excess of energy coming from renewables, but also because, in fact, we have volatility in the demand. If the electric consumption was flat every single hour of the year, it would be pretty straightforward. We would just build nuclear assets and we'll be done. This volatility that you mentioned, I think in May, German prices were as high as 200 euros in some hour and as low as 130 euros per megawatt in some hours. So it's a crazy spread. It's coming from the shape of the demand because we use less energy at night because we sleep, basically. A bit more energy in the morning when we all wake up and prepare ourselves to go to work. A bit more energy in the evening, especially in the summer. So there is this hourly shape in the demand that creates this volatility. And that also is the very reason why we need to have an energy mix. We can't have only nuclear, we can't have only renewables, we can't have only gas. We do need to combine the different technologies.
And with negative pricing, do you see an actual increase in the average LMP or the lowest marginal price? And if so, do you have an idea as to how much per megawatt hour? Is that something you track?
You mean how much the average price would go up because of negative prices? Again, that's a difficult question. Clearly, we're seeing this creates volatility because when you have a few negative hours, then it means you have to start up expensive power station for only a few hours. Therefore, you have to take into account startup costs and pay for them only over 2 or 3 hours in the evening. So this is why you have this crazy spread. That's in average, it doesn't really lower the price, having these negative prices. The second thing is that it probably causes challenges to the assets, having to up and down several times a day. They don't think they were all designed to do that. And the last thing is that whenever the grid operators foresee risk of negative prices, they have to find reserves, and sometimes they have to pay up for the reserves. So I don't think negative prices ultimately are great news for the consumer. I don't think that will get them to pay their electricity a lot lower.
Last question, if you want. Europe is a very interconnected region, meshed network, countries with a lot of interconnections. So one country producing sun power or wind power can export to the neighbor through the interconnection and can flood with low prices, negative prices, the neighbor, and forcing them to, let's say, change the mix, stop thermal power or nuclear power or whatever. How do you see these interconnections and the number of hours of negative prices in Europe this year?
I think interconnection are one of the answers to this trilemma, or to solve all these challenges. I don't think they're the unique solution for a few reasons. They're expensive. One could say that if you buy too many interconnectors, then there's no more price differential between countries. So how do you pay for the interconnector? Yeah. Then it's quite a long-term project. It takes 20 years to get all the approvals to build a new interconnector. I wouldn't say they're the unique answer to our problems, but they're one of the interesting tools, clearly. They've been working for quite a while. They were working before the liberalization of the market. They were over-the-counter transaction between the TSOs. So the market coupling that runs at the exchange, this automatic allocation of capacity works fairly well, let's say. It's one of the great achievements of Europe, so we should continue in that direction. But we shouldn't see the power market like the telecom market with only grid. There's the grid, it's an important point, but there's also what you inject into the grid that matters.
Fantastic. Emeric, let us close with a common question to all the guests. If you had a magic wand to unlock the energy trilemma, what would you do? What would you ask to unlock it?
If I had a magic wand, I'd make sure that all the people could sit around the table without any dogma and put numbers in front of their ideas and their scenarios so that we can come up with an ideal solution in terms of carbon footprint, but also cost. Because the worst that can happen to Europe or any country, making the energy transition unaffordable. And then we would have lost it both ways because we won't reach our target and the continent will be bankrupt.
All right. Emeric, thank you so much for your time. It's been a very interesting discussion. We covered a lot of ground. And,
likewise, thank you.
Yeah, and we look forward to your participation in future discussions such as this. And to our viewers, thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Emeric.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
We hope you liked this conversation. Because in the next episode, Ravi and JAM will speak with Mike Caravaggio, Thermal and Hydro Fleet Director at Kpler. Follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe for free to the podcast on the platform of your choice, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, or Apple.